In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to read a text file into a repository in .NET MAUI. I'm going to focus on just building an Android application because that's what I teach. There are some issues with this particular code and iOS and Windows. So what I have is I have a pretty straightforward XAML document. I've got two labels. It says terms read and the number of terms that will be read. I have a simple text file with just terms in it. Creating a really simple model today so that I can just focus on the code for reading as opposed to all the stuff that goes with it. This really extends nicely into a CSV file into a class that has lots of elements. Okay, so I'm going to build this kind of in a cheesy way. I'm not going to worry about MVVM. I am going to build a model in a repository. I'm just not going to build a view model, nor am I going to build the folders to go along with it. This is a really short little project, so I'm keeping it nice and simple. So in my project, I'm going to add a new class, and I'm going to call it term. Use public instead of internal. Just seems to work better. And all I'm going to need in here is a term and a constructor. I don't have to worry about using iNotify because I'm not changing this. I'm just simply reading this in. If I were to change this and write it back on disk, I'd have to inherit from iNotify and create property change, etc. But again, keeping this simple. I'm going to use propful. So I've created a property called the term. I've got a private property called underscore term. And I'll create the default constructor. Now these are easy to create, but if you haven't seen this trick, quick action refactoring, generate a constructor. I just generated that. You can also quick action refactorings, pick what terms refactor. Okay, so I'm good to go. This is my model. If I had 40 things in that terms.txt file, I'd have 40 properties here, and they would be CSV, and the process wouldn't change much. Just the read process would be a little more complicated. Okay, so I've got my model class. Now I'm going to create a repository. The repository is going to hold a list. There are several ways you can do this. I'm going to use a simple list. I could have also used an observable collection here. I like a list because it matches all the other languages I teach. So again, right-click, add another class. I'm going to call it term repository. Repository tends to be the word that the .NET MAUI organization uses or the community uses for stuff that holds data. Again, I'm going to make it public. And I'm going to have two properties, both of which I'll set with propful. I'm going to list a term, call it underscore list. Oh, it helped me again. I'm going to call all of them the list. And I'm going to have an int for term count, which will just be the count of the list. But I found it's easier to access it if I put it into a public variable than it is to try to pull the count out of here. It just seemed to work better for me. Right, so I'm going to have a constructor, and that constructor is going to read the list. Well, I'm going to create the function that reads the list now. I have terms in my resources raw because that is readable across all operating systems that .NET MAUI supports. You no longer have to worry about putting it into the right location for each OS. Resources raw just works. Okay, so let's create my function called readFile. So I'm going to call it fill term list. And essentially, it's just going to go old school read line by line. I'm going to have to read the line and then convert it into a term. Okay, so this creates for me a file stream that points to terms.txt. I'm using async here because you should always use async whenever you're accessing the file system on your device. You don't know how long it's going to take. I love the intelligence built into Visual Studio. So here I'm going to create a reader that reads that file. And now I'm going to write it line by line. Basically, I'm going to modify a term, make it a new. I'm going to use the constructor on a term each time I run through this. I'm going to pull the line out, which I already did, pass that into a term, and then add it to the list. Oops, not the term. Sorry, a term. So that's pretty traditional reading. There are quicker ways to do this built into .NET. I kind of like doing it old school. Now, this generates possible exceptions. I'm just going to catch any possible exception here. And if there's an exception, I'm going to set the term count to -1. That's going to signify my error. Oops. Hang on. And then I'll add this error to the list. That way I can display it on the screen without having to worry about dialog boxes and alerts and things of that nature. And my catch. Looks like I'm missing a curly brace. Yeah. All right, so old school walks through the file line by line, converts to a term, puts it into the list. I need to call that my constructor. And again, I use my trick. Just because we're lazy. I have to instantiate my list. I'll call the fill function. And I'll count the number of terms. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick run here, make sure I haven't broken anything. And then we'll come back. Alright, so my project does as little as it did before. It just simply displays terms read and 0. Now I need to map my bindings for this object into term list. and I need to display the list onto the screen. That's technically optional. Normally when I do something like reading to a list file, I'm just going to simply put it into memory so I can search for something, but some people like to display the lists. Okay, so stop. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my main page XAML. I'm going to add a models up here. If you would put this into a subfolder like view models or something, you just simply do a .view models here. As I said, I kept this nice and simple and everything's in the same folder. I know I'm going to set up some binding here. So binding context leads to the term repository, which is the class I just built. And then in my label, instead of 0, I'm going to set binding context. All right, so there are 239 words in my file. I know this because I built the file. I used Mockaroo.com to build myself a list of 500 words, and then I used Excel to pull out the unique ones, and I ended up with 239. Nothing magical about it, it's just the way that it works. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and we'll take a look and make sure I get 239 on that screen. All right, so after running and reading, I do have 239 here in my box, so I have read 239 items in the file. At this point, you now have a database in memory to search through as need be. Okay, so we do have one little glitch though with that repository. If I were to build this repository and have to access it through code, I have to call repository new again. But that's going to reread the list. So I'm going to modify that. I'm going to put a null around that. So only if the list is null am I going to do this. So that just solves me from reading the file again and again and again and again and again. Minor little issue, but could definitely save you some time and some battery power on a mobile device. All right, so now we're going to display this into my view. I've chosen a list view here. I chose a list view because you get a really nice little border below the words. I could have also done a collection view. They set up almost exactly the same way. I'll show you the only real difference as I build this between collection view and list view. If you read online between list view and collection view, it's kind of like a holy war between the two. Both are really good. Both have their perks. For my purposes, just displaying words, list view is perfect. So for my list view, I'm going to set an item source. And that has to be something that's IEnumerable. List happens to be IEnumerable. So at this point, if I ran it, it would just say list all the way down. So what you have to do is you have to build a template for it. The item template is going to describe what each row looks like. Since we're pulling from data, it's going to be coming out of data template. And here's the only difference really between a collection view and a list view. Is a list view, I have to build a view cell. In the collection view, I don't. So build your view however you want, grids, stack layouts, whatever. I'm going to use a grid. I like grids. Hope I do it right. There we go. Grid.row definition. Make it as tall as it needs to be. I'm never good at this spatial relation math. Build my column definitions. Obviously, if I had 7 things in my file, I'd probably have 7 columns here. I'd have some type of multi-row setup to make this look pretty. If you watch the videos online, like James Montenegro's, I can't pronounce his name right, but you watch the videos online from Microsoft, they do a really good job with this with their monkey demos. This is nice and simple. And here I simply have to bind it to the term. All right, so when I run this thing, I should have a list of 239 words. Since I've got it in a scroll view to scroll up and down for me, ListView scrolls up by itself. So this should be a pretty decent looking project. So let me hit run here. I'll pause and we'll come back. All right, so we're back. The app's up. Here are my words. You can see I can scroll. That's the scroll view that's running. I could have moved the scroll view down inside the vertical stack, but I'm happy. So what we've got here is we have an app that reads a simple text file, converts that simple text file into a list, and then populates the list into a list view. The list view is what gave me the lines between the rows. Had I used a collection view instead, I would have had to have hard-coded or defined those lines somehow myself. All right, so now you have a repository. You can learn how to search. You can learn how to walk through this repository, do what you need. In a later video, I will build search to search through the database. All right, thanks. Thanks for watching. Good luck.